When most people think of ethics or morals, they think of rules for distinguishing between right and wrong. Example, we have the golden rule, no? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And we have a code of professional conduct for the doctors, such as the Hippocratic Oath. First of all, do no harm. And then we also have the Ten Commandments. Sabi sa Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. So if you want something na Tagalog, no, we have this. Minsan kung ano ang iyong ginawa sa iyong kapwa, babalik at babalik sa iyo yan. Kung hindi man sa paraan kung paano mo sila sinaktan, sigurado si karma ang katapat mo niyan. So that's, I got this from Facebook. So sa madaling salita, what is ethics? So ethics, these are norms for conduct that distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. What's the unacceptable behavior? No, it's unacceptable to harm other people. It's unacceptable to kill them. So, kung paano mo gustong itrato ka ng tao, ganun din ang gagawin mo na pagtrato sa ibang tao. And what's the relationship of this with research? So, when we are conducting research, we have to keep in mind this ethics of acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Let's have some story on research ethics. So you can find this article in Smithsonian Magazine. So the title of this story is This Month's Gunshot Wound Gave Scientists a Window into Digestion. So in 1822, a stomach wound was most often a death sentence. Alexis St. Martin didn't die, but his life was irrevocably changed. So si Alexis St. Martin, he was accidentally shot at Fort Mackinac, Michigan, and he never fully healed. So si Dr. William Beaumont, ginamot siya. And then yung ginamot siya, hindi, yung sa stomach wound niya, hindi ito totally na nag-close. So, if you can imagine, there's an open wound, tapos pagka kumain ka, natatapon no, yung kinain mo. So, there's a wound. So, what happened? Si Alexis St. Martin, because of this condition niya na meron siyang fistula, stomach fistula, hindi na siya nakapagtrabaho. And he's a Canadian, no? So, pinapauwi siya dun sa Canada. Pero si Dr. William Beaumont, parang kinupkup siya at the condition na kinupkup siya, and then pagdating sa gabi naman, siya ay pinag-eksperimentuhan, pinag-aaralan yung stomach wound niya, yung fistula. And then, because of that, before St. Martin's living digestive system was studied, doctors knew what the digestive system looked like, but not how it looked or behaved while working. So ito, pagkakataon na ni Dr. William Beaumont na napag-aralan niya si Alexis St. Martin ng live, no, na di-discover niya what is happening sa isang human during digestion. So this experiment resulted in some important early insights into how human digestion works, but ang tanong dito, is this ethical? This is in 1822. So, without this strange situation, dito sa ginawa ni Dr. William Beaumont kay Alexis St. Martin, the field of gastroenterology may have progressed more slowly kung hindi yun nangyari. In fact, St. Martin's fistula was an inspiration to Pavlov, who used fistula in dogs during his famous classical condition experiments. So, nagkaroon pa pala ng idea si Pavlov dun sa ginawa ni Dr. William Beaumont kay Alexis St. Martin, kaya tayo nagkaroon ng classical conditioning that we use in psychology. But all this progress came at a cost to St. Martin, but also to those dogs. Kawawa naman si Alexis at saka yung mga aso na pinag-eksperimentuhan. So one of the most important ethical considerations in research is whether humans who participate are able to feasibly say no. So, sino tong mga to, no? People with little power, resources, or money can be coerced into participating in experiments that they're uncomfortable with. So, in any institution or school, university, or organization, they have an ethics board to review yung mga research proposal, no, for um, unacceptable behavior or violations of ethics. Kasi the ability to say no, that's very important, no, for the participants. And we call this voluntariness. This is one of the most important things, yung mga ethics board, that they check. This voluntariness would prohibit people with undue power or influence over us from asking that we participate in a research study. Example, yung teacher mo o kaya yung boss mo, they cannot get any research participants, and so they would ask the students or they would ask the employee to answer the survey. Otherwise, diba baka ka masisante o kaya bigyan ka ng failing grade kapag ka hindi ka pumayag dun sa gusto nila. So, ethical research needs to be voluntary, at least in humans. Kaya nga sinasabi dun sa mga animal rights, yung mga activists, they argue, since yung mga animals, hindi naman nila kayang mag-volunteer na pag-aralan sila, so hindi dapat sila ginagamit. So, in addition to their voluntary participation, yung mga humans, no, yung mga participants or subjects, they should also know what will happen to them during the study. Alam nila kung ano ang mangyayari at gagawin sa kanila if they are willing to participate. Next, we have the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. This is a clinical study conducted between 1932 and 1972 in Tuskegee, Alabama, by the United States Public Health Service. So, 400 Afro-American sharecroppers, most of them illiterate, were studied to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis up to their eventual death by the disease. The experiment aroused controversy and led to changes in the legal protection of the patients involved in clinical studies. Subjects involved in this experiment did not give their informed consent. They were not informed of their diagnosis and were told that they were being treated for bad blood. They were also told that if they participated in the study, they would be given free medical care, free transportation to the clinic, free meals, and free burial insurance in the case of death. Subjects were also warned to avoid penicillin treatment, which was already in use with other patients nearby. Here is another research ethics story. So we have Henrietta Lacks, who went to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Maryland kasi meron siyang cells na merong tumor, tapos yung mga scientists dun sa hospital, kinuha yung tumor, they collected the tumor without her knowledge or consent. And then itong mga cells from the tumor, they were used to grow a new cell line called the HeLa line na ginagamit ng mga scientists to do in vitro experiments. So the cell's ability to thrive and multiply outside her body made the cell line useful to researchers. So hanggang ngayon, ginagamit tong HeLa line for medical research. So yung mga research about cancer and AIDS, as well as immunology studies, like the one that led Jonas Salk, yung nakadiscover ng polio vaccine, it originated from the HeLa line na cell. And in 1955, HeLa cells were the first human cells to be successfully cloned. Anong nangyari? Yung family ni Lax, hindi sila nakakuha ng kahit na anong financial benefit, kahit napakarami ng benefit na nakuha nila from the tumor cells na nanggaling kay Henrietta Lacks. Although pinangalan naman sa kanya yung cell line. So what's the importance of this? These studies emphasize the need for informed consent. Subjects have the right to not only receive all the facts relevant to their decision to participate, they have the right to understand them. Pero kung titignan mo, ang laki ng naging ambag no, ng HeLa line cell sa society natin. It's so precious like this, no? They allowed scientists to perform experiments that would have not been impossible with a living human. So because of that, nag-advance yung technology natin, nakakita ng mga possible solution for polio, for immunology, for AIDS, for cancer. Yun lang hindi sila nagpaalam kay Henrietta Lacks. In 1947, the Nuremberg Code was created in order to establish guidelines for the ethical treatment of human subjects. One of the main tenets is beneficence, which not only requires that researchers minimize the potential for risk to subjects, but also requires that the risk should be outweighed by potential benefits to the patient and the scientific community. Kasi yung nangyari dun sa tatlong ethical research stories natin, no, walang potential benefit na nangyari dun sa mga patient. May nangyaring benefit sa scientific community pero hindi nag-benefit yung mga sa Tuskegee na syphilis experiment, yung kay St. Martin at saka itong kay Henrietta Lacks. So the Nuremberg Code was created and implemented after the Second World War, during which horrifying experiments were conducted on prisoners in Nazi concentration camps. So may mga doctors who conducted experiments dun sa mga prisoners. This is after the Second World War, after World War II. So before that, wala pang ethical standards. So after nito, saka lang sila naglagay ng 10 principles to which modern-day studies still must adhere. So these 10 principles stand as the basis for much of current research ethics and include things like voluntariness, informed consent, and beneficence. Now, for you to have an idea of what kind of Nazi experiments did the doctors conducted on the prisoners, so this is an example. So they tried to transplant bone, muscle, and joints. So they tried to amputate limbs from prisoners in useless attempts to transplant them onto other inmates. So parang they were experimenting kapag may pinutol ka ba na legs, kaya mo ba itong i-transfer sa ibang tao? And so because of that, many of the victims perished as a result. You can view other Nazi experiments here at the pbs.org site. So this is the Nuremberg Code. So this is the this is the simplest Nuremberg Code that I've seen in the internet. Okay, una, the patient has to agree to the experiment. So hindi pwede na namimili tayo ng mga research participants natin. Dapat sila ay mag-volunteer at mag-agree sila na magpa-participate. Next, the experiment should make society better. So, mas marami dapat ang makaka-benefit ng mga ikakandak natin na experiment at saka mga researches. Hindi yung pharmaceutical company lang yung makaka-benefit. So, it should be mas malawak yung application niya. Third, it should be tested on animals first to show it is safe. So, prior animal testing is necessary para lang maipakita na pwede rin siya sa humans. It shouldn't hurt the patient. So, we cannot conduct any experiment or research na may physical harm, na may masasaktan, may pain, magkukos tayo ng pain sa ibang tao. Just like yung sa diniscuss natin in the earlier slides na do unto others what others would want to do unto you, diba? And then do no harm. Next, the experiment should not be done at all if death is possible. So this is a big no. We cannot conduct any experiment na may possibility, na may risk na pwedeng ikamamatay ng mga participant or researchers natin. Next, the good needs to outweigh the risk. So, ito yung beneficence, no? If we are looking at the cost and benefit, dapat mas mataas ang balik sa atin ng good kesa yung sa risk. So it's not a cost and benefit law. It's a risk and benefit. So we have to weigh the risk and the benefits. So it's always dapat mataas ang benefit na sa atin. We should test subjects. Test subjects should be kept in clean, safe places. So if you have human participants or human experiments, halimbawa, dadalhin mo sila sa hotel, maganda yung tutuluyan nila, hindi yung parang tinatrato mo sila na parang hayop, no, na ang dumi-dumi, hindi mo pakakainin. This is also conducted on animal experiments na if you're conducting animal experiments, dapat yung kulungan nila ay malinis, pinapakain sila, pinapainom sila, and they are in a safe place. Next, the experiment should be done by an informed scientist. So, more or less, dapat yung mga experiment, alam niya, no? The experimenter should know, or the scientist should know what he's doing. Expert siya dun sa ginagawa niya. Kagaya ng sinabi ko kanina, hindi pwede na random lang yung mga gagawin natin experiments. Dapat lahat ito ay pinagplaplanuhan, and then, especially, meron kang kasamang scientist na expert. Next, the patient should be able to stop and walk away. So at any time, the respondents, the participants, can stop and walk away. Pwedeng siyang mag-say no. Although nag-volunteer siya, at any time, pwede siyang umalis na walang mangyayari sa kanyang masama. Na hindi mo siya babalikan, na hindi sasama ang loob mo sa kanya. Okay. And then, lastly, the scientist should stop immediately if it looks like the patient will be harmed or die. Pagka yung experimenter nakikita na niya na nahihirapan na, may pain na, or may anxiety na yung respondents or participants, the experiment should be stopped immediately. The research should be halted, no? Hihinto na dapat kasi magkakaroon ng harm dun sa mga respondents. And that is not good. So even though we have the Nuremberg Code, between 1947 and 1978, there were many unethical studies done on humans. There was a need for a stricter code. No, if you remember yung mga experiments din, Watson, kay Little Albert, no, it was in these stages kay Skinner between ng 1955 kasi yun So, nagkaroon ng Belmont Report that was published in 1978. So, the Belmont Report has 3 core principles. Una, respect for persons. People have the right to make their own choices. People should be informed at their education level before consenting. So, ibig sabihin, kung bata yan, meron siyang kasama na adult, i-explain din natin dun sa level na maiintindihan din ng bata at saka nung adult na kasama niya. Provide protections to vulnerable populations like children, prisoners, and cognitively impaired. Itong mga vulnerable populations, meron niyang mas kailangan nila ng protection if they would participate in any research or experiments. Next, we have beneficence. Do not harm, and we maximize the benefits, and we minimize the risk. And then justice, we treat people fairly. Wala tayong papaboran, wala tayong mas mag-experiment ka, meron ka mas mahihirapan. No? We treat them equally. Will the group share in the benefit of this research? Kagaya ito yung madalas natin sinasabi kanina, madalas yung mga research that would only benefit kung sino yung nagpapa-experiment or yung mga organization, pero wala namang benefit to the society. And then, equitable selection of subjects. Pag sinabing equitable, pag sa experiments, meron tayong mga matching, meron tayong representation, di ba meron tayong mga random sampling, so dapat kino-consider din siya. Okay? So we have typical research involving ethical risk. First, we have vulnerable groups, such as children and young people, those with learning disabilities or special needs. Example, merong autism, yung bata, or ADHD. You have to consider that these are children, and kapag may ADHD, they're very fidgety, magulo, makulit, and then similarly, if you are giving them test or exam, pagka ayaw na nila, hindi mo sila pwedeng pilitin na matatapos. And then you have to consider then yung time that you're going in their place, right? So pwede rin like yung privacy and then confidentiality, because it's so hard to get these kinds of participants. And then for the elderly or mga senior, you have to consider their age then, that some of them may be ill, or yung time na if you want to interview them, baka nagpapahinga na sila, or meron kayong mapapag-usapan na it may bring back memories that would make them anxious or emotional. Diba? So we have these vulnerable groups. And for children, we need their informed consent. And next, we have sensitive topics. For example, sexual or illegal activities or people's experience of abuse or violence. Ang problem dito is, aside from the sensitive topic, how are you going to get a respondents or participants involved in these kinds of illegal activities? You have drugs, you have people na naka-experience ng abuse or violence, unless they confide, excuse me, unless they confide in you or may nagkwento. Pagka nagkwento, paano mo nalaman? Baka may na-break na confidentiality. And then yung privacy nila, diba na some things are mga topics na privately lang to pinag-uusapan, and you cannot just talk about it openly with another person. Oh, so an example, no, itong online sex racket, yung mga prostitution, drugs, or mga natotokhang, diba, maraming mga involved na ethical risk for that. This is another typical research involving ethical risk if the subjects can only be accessed via a gatekeeper. For example, some ethnic or cultural groups. When we talk about the gatekeeper, so pwedeng sila yung may kakilala lang dun sa head ng isang tribo or isang ethnic group, and then you have to ask permission from them if you're going to conduct researches about indigenous people here in the Philippines. You have to ask the LGU, plus meron tayong mga cultural groups that needs their approval before you can reach them. Hindi pwede na basta-basta ka lang magbabarge in dun sa community nila. And I think I remember there's a community or an ethnic group in northern sa Benguet or somewhere in the Cordillera, no, that they do not welcome yung mga strangers. So you really need somebody who knows them that will introduce you to them before you can get any participants from the indigenous group. We have another example of typical research involving ethical risk. We have element of deception, such as covert observation used without a participant's full or informed consent. Just like an example here, if you know the experiment of Stanley Milgram, wherein they ask participants to give electric shock to another person in the other room, but in reality, wala naman talagang electric shock. So that's part of the deception. Siya pala yung pinag-eksperimentuhan. So lahat ng mga nandun sa room ay mga Confederate or mga kakuntsaba. So ang pinag-aaralan kung magbibigay siya ng electric shock base dun sa instruction ng experimenter. Another one is about confidential records or information. No? This is about like confidentiality tsaka data privacy. We have a Data Privacy Act, no, in the Philippines. So what are examples of confidential records? Mga personal and private informations, these are confidential. And then, yung mga cases na like yung mga crime, yung sa mga police, mga cases, those are mga confidential records. And hindi rin ito madaling ma-access. So, most probably, kung may nakuha ka mga ganitong information, it should pass through legality, or kasi baka illegal mo siya nga nakuha yung mga data. Siyempre, dapat magpapaalam ka, you need permission from the owner of the data or yung sa mga person involved. Next, we have activities leading to stress, anxiety, or humiliation amongst target groups. The best example for here, if you are familiar, is the Stanford Prison Experiment conducted by Philip Zimbardo. Ang ginawa niya, they have two sets of group of males. Ni-recruit niya to, no, yung mga males. These are healthy males. Tapos ginawa niyang, yung isang group ginawa niyang prisoner, yung isa ginawa niyang mga prison guards. Pagdating pa lang, I think, no, pagdating pa lang ng 2 weeks in this experiment, pinastop na siya kasi sobra yung agony ng mga participants here dun sa experiment. Nagkaroon to ng mga stress and anxiety. And syempre, even humiliation. Na-internalize kasi nila yung role nila as a prisoner and as a prison guard. Another example, syempre, we cannot induce anxiety or stress dun sa mga participants natin or subjects. Pero here, ginawa nito sa influence of music on anxiety induced by fear of heights in virtual reality. Gumamit naman siya ng VR, virtual reality, para ma-induce yung fear of heights. And then, itetest kung may effect pa sa yung music dun sa anxiety na na-create in the virtual reality. So to speak, ethical principles fall into 4 main areas, namely the need to avoid harm to participants and producing benefits. So this is beneficence and non-maleficence. Next, we have informed consent, the right to privacy, and avoid the use of deception. So how can we avoid harm to participants? Research will be considered harmful if it causes a participant to be embarrassed. Mapapahiya sila kasi meron kang papagawa sa kanila, palalakarin mo sila ng semi-naked or magsasalita sa harapan tapos maraming nanonood, or ridicule, biglang may papasuot ka sa kanila, hindi naman nila gusto. So, hindi tayo pwede magpagawa ng labag sa kanilang kagustuhan. Belittled or generally subject to mental distress. Like for example, yung ginagawa ng mga Nazi dun sa concentration camp, diba? Hina-hurt nila yung mga participants. Like, can you imagine, yung iba ron, dadali nila sa labas, tapos walang damit, if you freeze, I mean, they were testing you sa freezing point ng human, diba? That would cause mental distress. And even yung mga, when you ask people or respondents to talk about things that they do not want to talk about, that would bring mental distress. So, hindi tayo pwedeng mamilit. Anxious, anxiety, stress, yung mapapagod sila, na may iisipin sila, may gagawin sila. Subject to negative emotional reactions. So, kagaya yung mga binigay ko ng example kanina. I got this from another resource. How could you harm research participants physically, no? Sasaktan mo, papaluin mo, susugatan mo, by damaging their development or self-esteem. Hindi mo sila papapasukin, mapapahiya sila. Okay? By causing stress, nasabi ko na kanina, by hurting their career prospects or employment opportunities. Pwede rito kasi pumasok yung like confidentiality, nag-participate sa experiment, tapos biglang na-divulge ang information or yung mga hindi sila makakahanap ng mga ibang trabaho because of the research that you conducted. By breaking confidentiality, like for example, meron pala siyang sakit or disorder, tapos na-breaking confidentiality, nalaman ng ibang tao, diba? That would also cause an effect or influence on the self-esteem, magkukos rin siya ng stress, and by revealing their identity. So this is very important na halimbawa kung nag-a-ask ka ng survey, tapos may sinabing negative yung isang respondents, tapos naglagay ka ng may pangalan yun, tapos biglang nag-leak yung records mo, nalaman na sa kanya pala nanggaling yung negative na evaluation, tapos nalaman ng boss, nalaman ng teacher, di ba meron yung mga harmful effect pag na-reveal ang identity. So beyond avoiding harm, research should produce positive benefits such as adding to human knowledge. So make sure na lahat ng gagawin natin na related to research would add or increase, may additive value dun sa mga topic na ating nire-research. Hindi yung kung ano-ano lang yung by random lang yung ginawa mo na researches. Meron tayong mapapatunayan. Next, yielding accurate and valid results. Honesty is very important kasi pagka hindi ka honest, hindi ka nagre-report ng accurate, no, may falsification, may fraud, tapos hindi valid yung result, tapos maraming gagamit pag pinablish mo yan, maraming makakaalam na research mo yung pala, hindi mo inayos yung paggawa ng research, hindi ka rin honest dun sa mga data mo, mas magkukos pa to ng harm. Next, providing feedback to respondents if possible to promote greater self-understanding if desired. Especially with informed consent, kailangan malaman ng mga participants kung bakit sila included in a research, may benefits ba yun sa kanila, what's going to happen sa kanila. Like, in some instances, may mga researchers na nagsasabi, pinapadala nila yung mga results ng like survey, no, para mas maintindihan nila yung kanilang mga scores. So when it comes to informed consent, researchers should provide information on the aims of the research. It should be clear kung para saan to, sinong makaka-benefit, sino yung mga taong involved, kasi kailangang mag-decide din ng tao na kung papayag siya dun sa ipapagawa mo sa kanya. Like, people would likely to participate kung alam nila na madaming makaka-benefit dun sa research. So, important na malaman nila yung goal. Who will be undertaking it? So, they also need to know kung expert ba yung gagawa ng isang research. Meron ba siyang skills to do the research? Diba, saan, like, what's the qualification, what's the accomplishment, yung mga background niya, importante rin yun. For informed consent, kasi at any time, pagka may ayaw yung mga respondents, pwede silang umatras. If they know, example, halimbawa, nalaman niya, no, na dati pala niyang boyfriend yung isang experimenter. So, baka magkaroon ng bias yung result or maiba yung sagot niya or baka hindi siya payagan ng asawa niya kapag nalaman na ng asawa niya na ex pala niya yung experimenter. No, so parang something like that. Who is being asked to participate? So, it's also important to discuss the qualifications, yung sampling, anong age, meron ba yung height requirement, weight requirement, may educational background ba, or may screening ba yan na mangyayari. Kasi baka mamaya gusto lang, naisama lang kita kasi ikaw lang yung pinaka-convenient, no? Yun pala, may experiment, gusto ka lang pahirapan. Then, something like that. So more or less, they should know who is being asked to participate and what kind of information is being sought. So is this something personal? Problems pa? Difficulties pa? May sasagutan ba silang questionnaire or survey lang ba to? Does it include, pipicturean mo yung bahay mo, magto-talk about something that you do not want to talk about? Diba? So at any time, pag na-explain mo to sa mga participants or subject, pag may ayaw sila, pwede silang umatras. How much of the participants' time is required? This is very important kasi iistorbohin mo sila, kailangan nilang malaman kung they also need to know their schedule. Plus kasi minsan you have to get back to them, no? Kahit tapos na yung mga researches kasi baka may balikan ka, may gusto kang itanong. So, dapat malaman nila na ito, isang oras lang, pwede mag-extend ng 20 minutes or survey lang, 15 minutes lang. Sabihin mo kung yung survey ba ay 30 items, 100 items, so they would know, makakapag-alat sila ng time, how much time they would spend participating in your research. Next, that participation in the study is voluntary, walang pilitan. That responding to all questions is voluntary rin. Pagka may ayaw sagutin, huwag sagutin. Who will have access to the data once it is collected? Saan ilalagay? Naka-soft copy ba yan? Naka-hard copy ba yan? Naka-secure ba siya? Ma-maintain ba ang confidentiality? Saan i-store? Sa opisina, baka merong ibang may maka-access dun sa mga data. Diba? So, it's important na yung storage din. How anonymity of respondents will be preserved? So, mas maganda, you will not ask anything personal, yung name, yung mga address, yung mga email addresses, diba? To maintain an anonymity. Who should it be returned to and by when? Usually, if you have, diba, pagka may mga nag-post ng surveys in the internet or online, meron silang nilalagay na contact person so that yung mga respondents or subjects can ask questions relating to the research. And then, di ba may deadline ng pagsagot? Dati rin kasi classic kung wala pang online, yung mga dati ang nagre-research, nagpapadala sila ng snail mail, mini mail, tapos yung ipapadala, ibabalik sa kanila. Diba? So, kasama yon. Research participants must know that that is what they are and what the research process is. So, dapat malinaw na malinaw yan sa mga participants, sa mga subjects, sa mga respondents kung ano ang ine-expect sa kanila at kailangan nilang gawin. But, implementing this principle is easier said than done. It is extremely difficult to present prospective participants with absolutely all the information that might be required to make an informed decision about their involvement. Kasi kung if you were able to discuss everything yung sinabi ko kanina, kasi baka most probably, no, baka talaga mawalan tayo ng mga respondents. Siguro i-assure na lang natin na walang harm, no, minimal risk kung sakasakali ang pag-participate nila dun sa mga survey or experiments. In ethnographic research, the researcher is likely to come into contact with a wide spectrum of people, and ensuring that absolutely everyone has the opportunity for informed consent is not practicable because it would be extremely disruptive in everyday context. So, halimbawa, gumagawa ka ng ethnographic research. Bawat kita mo ba ng tao, mag-i-inform consent ka pa? May dumating, may informed consent. Sandali mo lang nakausap, nakita mo lang, nag-observe na. Hihingi ka na ng informed consent. Diba? So, it's not practical. At saka disruptive pa in the everyday context. Diba? Pagpunta ka ron, naglalaba, inabutan mo, naglalaba, naglilinis, nagluluto. Tapos, explain mo yung kuhaan mo ng informed consent. So, may mga hindi rin absolute na makukuhanan natin din siya ng informed consent. Next, respecting privacy. Respondents must give informed consent. So, there are things na dapat private lang pinag-uusapan, mga personal data, you cannot ask. Personal questions. Diba, respondents have the right to withdraw at any time. Kung halimbawa nainis na siya, nagutom siya, hindi mo na asikaso, diba, pwede siyang umalis. The data in electronic and manual forms must be kept securely. I think na-discuss ko na rin to kanina. And then may time rin to, no, kung gaano katagal yung storage. Tapos, kung nasa computer to, dinidelete, tinatanggal. So, this is a similar topic nun sa una. Nakita ko to with the other materials in the internet, no? Invasion of privacy. Privacy is very much linked to the notion of informed consent. Sa lahat ng bagay, kailangan kang magpaalam. At ipapaalam mo dun sa subject, sa respondents mo, kung anong data yung kukunin mo. The researcher participant does not abrogate the right to privacy entirely by providing informed consent. Hindi komo't nagbigay sila ng informed consent, ay meron ka ng right para ma-invade ang kanilang privacy. Magkaiba ang informed consent. Pumapayag lang sila dun sa like aim, sa mga information sa research mo, but they have every right to privacy. Covert methods are usually deemed to be violations of the privacy principle. So, hindi pwede class na, halimbawa, yung sa pag-video, hindi ka pwedeng kunan mo ng picture, hindi ka pwedeng mag-video na hindi ka nagpapaalam, parang ganun. Sinimplihan mo lang, no, pinicturean mo lang or inobserve mo lang sa sinulat mo, hindi rin siya pwede kasi that would violate the privacy principle. The issue of privacy is invariably linked to issues of anonymity and confidentiality in the research process. Let's talk about deception. So here lies, damn lies, and research. Deception usually means we represent our research as something other than it so that participants will respond more naturally. So similarly, yung experiment ni Milgram na diniceive nila yung subject na siya lang, may mga actors doon na umaarte lang, siya pala yung subject, siya pala yung pinag-eksperimentuhan kung ano yung gagawin sa kanya. Or yung another, usually no, parang pag-deception, ang maiisip mo yung mga prank, tapos may video, tapos titignan nila kung ano yung magiging reaction mo. Diba? Similar to that. Siyempre kasi para yung mga participants will respond more naturally. Pagka nagbigay ka naman ng informed consent, baka hindi mo rin makuha yung mga gusto mo na data. This means it is quite a widespread practice, yung deception. So deception means not telling the whole truth while not actually telling a lie. So parang kinontra niya yung informed consent, no, itong deception. So, you don't tell the whole truth. Pero hindi ka rin naman nagsisinungaling. So, we must be vigilant in keeping deception to a minimum. Minimum lang ang deception. And when it is necessary to the research, mitigating its degree and effects as much as possible. So, we have privacy, we have confidentiality, we have deception. When you are going to use this, yung deception, talagang kung hindi maiwasan, di ba? Ang pinaka-importante, do no harm. Kung may gagawin ka na research or experiment, make sure hindi masasaktan, hindi mapapahamak ang inyong mga subject. Apart from moral objections to deception, research participants and funders can become wary of being fooled or tricked into providing data. Diba iba mga nagtitrick para lang ibigay sa iyo yung mga data na kailangan mo. Mas maganda, umpisa pa lang, maliwanag na lahat at saka clear. Kasi pagka ganito, isipin nila, nanloloko ka, hindi mo magiging yung trust ng mga tao. Baka hindi mo rin makomplete yung research mo kung hindi mo nagain yung trust ng mga participants o mga funder, magbibigay ng funds. So, avoiding deception, parang similar lang din to dun sa informed consent. It's best achieved by being open and transparent about the research, including its objectives, the methods, the uses, the role of respondent, including time, and any other commitment. Siguro kung meron ka man ditong hindi sasabihin ay yung, kasi dapat no transparent ka. Pero sabi dun sa unang slide, it's a widespread practice. Pwede kang mag-withheld ng information, pero hindi ka rin naman nagsisinungaling. So parang siguro ginagawa nila ito parang vague, na medyo may kalabuan yung ginagawa nila. Siyempre, para makakuha rin sila ng data for their experiment.